You're listening to the Reddit Ranger. Now, in today's story, OP finds themselves a nice big kitty companion. Today also happens to be the birthday of my kitty. She turns a year old today. Say happy birthday to Izumi. So if you will, please give Izzy a nice happy birthday for me. And here we are now, going down to another of Naiavita's campaign. We're going to keep doing this till we get caught up to where they are currently. I think we still got about 6 more sessions to go after this. But here we are with Session 5, Castle Crashing and Kitty Cats. While Thunder Tree was hardly inviting, at least we got what we needed. We knew the location of Cragmaw Castle, and that's where we were headed. Unfortunately, it was almost as far south as Fandalen, making our trip largely wasted. We didn't want the trip to take any more time than needed, so we decided to travel an entire day and night before making camp. Keeping quite a pace, we skirted along the west edge of the Neverwinter Wood, heading south toward the Tribor Trail. We would need to turn eastward at the forest edge and head deeper to the castle. As the second evening drew nearer, we decided to make final camp before reaching the castle, as it would do us no good traipsing about in the dark. Valanthia took first watch as the rest of us had a short rest. I was looking through my bag when I heard something a ways away from our camp. A sort of yowling, like a wounded animal. Curious, I followed the sound through a thicket to a clearing not far from the tree line. The remains of an upturned wagon lay in the grass, with various iron cages scattered around. A merchant of sorts? Judging from the variety of bright feathers and claw marks here and there, one who specialized in exotic animals. I was startled to attention by another yowl, this one followed by a low growl. I spotted a larger cage that was unopened, and inside was a young panther. A male by the looks of him. His sleek black fur was matted and dirty from his time in captivity. Had he been abandoned here and left to die? I slowly approached and examined the lock. It was worn enough that I should have no trouble breaking it. Sure enough, a swift kick bent it out of shape, and I slid it off the bar. I opened the cage, and the poor creature shifted as far back as it could, baring its teeth in self-defense. It seems it expected to be punished, the poor thing. I hummed softly and reached out a hand. He clenched his eyes shut as I gently pressed my hand on his head. As I stroked his fur, his breathing steadied, and I could hear what almost sounded like a purr. I pulled a piece of meat out of my pack and offered it to him, coaxing him out of the cage. He kept low to the ground, still afraid of me. I sat with him as he snacked on the jerky, patting his back. After some time, he had completely warmed up to me, purring loudly as I gave him all the belly rubs I could muster. It seems he had been a pet at some point before and was sold to a menagerist. I'm really not sure why. Who wouldn't want a giant kitty as a pet? I mean, I know I would. We headed back to the camp, and Demos jumped to his feet and drew his short sword. What is that thing? This is Growl, and I'm keeping him. I knelt down and hugged his head, squishing his face slightly. Of course he didn't mind in the slightest. Valanthia and Taco approached, offering affection, leaving Grell looking very pleased to say the least. Not to spoil this touching meeting, said Othan, keeping his distance, but the last time we came across a wild animal, it, didn't go so well. Are you sure this is a good idea? Positive. Just look at this little face. Aww. I stopped, realizing this behavior may not be appropriate for someone who had recently reached the ripe age of 85. You know, I have to disagree with that one, OP. I politely cleared my throat and released my new pet. Yes, I'm sure. It was nearly halfway to morning when I relieved Valanthia. A few hours in, I heard what sounded like rustling. This far from civilization, there was bound to be plenty of wildlife. But this was not a lone creature, and the sound was all around us. I peered into the darkness at the edge of camp. I may not have seen anything, but I'm not stupid. I whistled sharply, alerting the others, and slowly nocked an arrow. When I heard the rustling again, I fired an arrow into the thickets ahead of me. A sharp cry rang out, and a pack of wolves tore from the underbrush and charged the camp from all sides. Valanthia readied her blade, but one of the wolves leapt at her and sank its fangs into her arm. She struggled to free herself as another tried to get a hold of her. Taco raised her shield and bashed it away, swinging her sword down into another's back. Othin held his hands above his head, muttering an incantation. As he finished, he flung them forward, and from his palms flew a torrent of magic missiles. They pelted the wolves left and right, finishing off the one stuck to Taco's sword. As he tried to ready another spell, one of the pack circled around him and latched onto his leg. It twisted hard, and Othin tumbled down to the ground. Demos, having been practicing with magic the last few days, pointed his fingers like a gun and, bang, sent a beam of frost hurtling into Othin's aggressor. Now freed, he kicked to his feet and turned to see another wolf charging towards him. Having had enough of this, he clapped his hands together, sending a ripple of light from his body. As the ripple steadied, figures could be seen standing in formation around him. The wolf bit and clawed, but caught nothing but the empty air. It seems Othin had been practicing as well, and made some room to maneuver with some mirror images. Seeing as they were too close to risk using a bow, I drew my scimitars and gave a slash at the closest wolf. A glancing blow, but it pulled away to make some distance for another attack. I kept pace, slashing left and right. I was giving it no chance to react, and landed a solid hit and cut a swath of crimson down the length of its body. It howled and stumbled back, and Taco used this chance to fire a bolt from her crossbow. The bolt sank into the side of its head, and it fell flat, twitching for a moment before going limp. Valanthia swiped her hand and sent a splash of acid across another, sending it dancing around trying to shake off the pain. As its fur fell off in clumps, it made a last-ditch charge. Valanthia swung her scimitar down and nearly split its head in two. With only two of them left, they decided to take a gamble. If they could separate one of us from the group, they might still have a chance at a meal. As they tried to surround Valanthia, I rushed forward when I heard a loud yelp from behind me. I turned to see Grell sink his fangs into one of the pack who had tried to herd him away. He was about as fond of dogs as he was of cages. We kept at them, giving them no wiggle room, while Othin and Taco finished them off. I sat down on the ground and let out an exasperated sigh. Just what was it about us that attracted vicious animals? Grell was the obvious exception, resting his head on my leg and grooming his paws. Good kitty. The rest of the evening was uneventful, thank the gods. Come morning, we broke camp and reached the castle as the first birds began to sing. The fortress was in quite a state of disrepair. The forward tower all but collapsed. Where once stood a great oaken door, there remained little more than rotting scraps of wood hanging from a few rusted hinges. With the presence of only a few arrow slits providing minimal sight, it was clear the goblins were very confident in their numbers alone. Or they simply assumed no one would come looking for them. We were happy to disappoint them. With the help of his owl familiar, Othin made a sweep of the front and noted no additional goblins outside. They were all holed up inside, and we, in our infinite wisdom, decided to walk right in through the front door. I crept up the stairs and pressed myself against the crumbling turret, inching ever closer to the doorway. Grell followed close behind me, with Valanthia and Othin doing the same on the opposite side. Demos headed up the rear and was nearly at the top when his foot caught on a piece of rubble. While a minor inconvenience for most people, Demos is not most people. He teetered back and went crashing down the stairs with a loud frick, the contents of his backpack spilling noisily as he tumbled to the bottom. Ball bearings, lockpicks, and all manner of roguish implements fell hither and thither, ringing like bells and surely alerting every goblin from here to the crags. I turned back and held up my hands in a sort of helpless, "Why?" gesture. As he stood, an arrow came whistling out of a slit and struck him in the arm. Annoyed that his mishap had an audience, he made another finger gun and bang, sent a wisp of crimson back through the tiny opening. A burst of light shone from the slit, and the goblin archer could be heard screaming deeper into the castle before falling silent, consumed by the hellish flames.
"Intruders at the gate! Times!
Cried another. We dove through the gates and into the fray. Goblins stormed out of their towers and came at us from both sides. Othin kept a few at bay with a wall of flames, but Valanthia was blocked by another who came up behind her as she entered. Avoiding his attacks, she jumped back when she heard a loud snap. Her leg had caught a tripwire, and a mass of stones fell from above. As they struck her, she slammed against a doorway and toppled into another room. She stood to see the faces of at least half a dozen more goblins, all seated in what looked to be a dining hall. A great fat one sporting a soiled apron and a massive cleaver let out a roar and sent the rest of them into the frenzy. Taco cut a bloody path and grabbed Valanthia by the belt and heaved her back, slamming the door into them as they tried to file out. She braced herself against the door to buy us some time, but it was not going to be much. I fired at the next goblin that came into view, and further down the hall a door swung open to reveal another problem. A hobgoblin stepped out and barreled at me. I blessed an arrow and fired again. It struck the goblin square in the chest, and vines tore through the stone floor and wrapped around its body. While it tugged in vain at the constricting tendrils, 2 more exited the room. It just kept getting better. Grell ran ahead and proceeded to harass them and keep them from getting any closer. Demos drove his dagger through one of their skulls and took a swing at another while Othin peppered them with magic. Knowing our chances were at this point minimal, we silently agreed that it was time to go. As Othin turned to face the door, one of the archers drew their sword and charged him, blocking his escape. Taking notice of this, Demos stopped his fight from the castle and spun around. He lined up a shot with his short bow and sniped Othin's attacker. Othin saw Taco struggling with all her might as the door behind her began to splinter. He turned to face another 3 goblins and agreed that it was definitely time to go. He held his arms in front of his body, palms facing his foes. With a heavy push, sent a wave of tremendous force forward, stripping them of both armor and flesh and slamming their husks against the stone wall. As he ran out the door, I was once again reminded why you should never piss off a wizard. Demos was covering our escape with his bow, so Taco leapt forward and grabbed a large chunk of stone. She hefted it above her head and spun around. As soon as the door opened, she heaved it for all she was worth and was rewarded with the splattering sound of a goblin's head cracking open like an egg. The others reeled back in terror and decided it best not to pursue the walking trebuchet. The hobgoblin, entangled with vines, tried again and again to free himself, but it was all for naught. As he tugged at the vines, the thorns raked his body and sent streams of blood pouring out. He went limp and fell to the floor. His companions cried out, and one of them tried to get a hold of Grell. He slinked out of reach and bit into an assailant's hand. The hobgoblin howled in pain as the other tried to grab him as well. Another miss. Grell danced about, hissing and roaring, keeping out of reach. I inched ever closer to the doorway, firing arrows, and Demos leapt from the top of the stairs and made haste into the trees. Taco and Othin followed suit, while Valanthia backed out of the doorway and hurled a ball of fire at the goblins. I was nearing the stairs when I stepped in line with one of the arrow slits. Apparently, not all the archers had come to face us head-on, and an arrow sunk into my gut. My legs buckled from under me, and I dropped to my knees. The pain was terrible, and try as I might, I could barely move. Grell let out a roar and made a mad dash through the crowd. He tackled another goblin and tore him open while Valanthia approached me from behind. She grabbed me by the shoulders and pulled me backwards and into the cover of the stairs. I shut my eyes hard and yelped when she ripped out the arrow. She placed her hand on my stomach and began to whisper softly. Golden light seemed to pour out of her hands and into my body, warmth washing over me as the wound zipped shut. I owed her my life again. I wheezed as she pulled me to my feet, groggy from the pain, but within moments was able to walk on my own. Well, run would be more accurate, and we took off into the woods as the goblins shouted from the ruins. Grell easily outpaced me, circling back several times to make sure I was all right. We stopped once we hit the first clearing nearly a half-mile from the castle. Exhausted, we tried to catch our breath and hoped the goblins had not followed us this far. Our brief respite was interrupted by the sudden snapping of twigs from somewhere behind us, and we once again readied our weapons. I took a step forward, eager to flush out the enemies and get this mess over with. A goblin burst from behind a tree several feet from my face, waving its hands and screeching. We all let out a terrified scream, but my panic was immediately replaced with rage. I balled up a fist and proceeded to cave in the goblin's face. It slammed against the tree as blood gushed from its nose. As I gripped my scimitar and raised it above my head, the goblin raised its hands in surrender and spoke with a familiar voice. "Take it easy, it's me!" It seems Demos had used magic to disguise himself as a goblin and had intended to double back to the castle in an effort to sneak inside. But when he remembered that I was the only one amongst us who could actually speak Goblin, he had decided to use his new appearance to have some fun with us. I clenched my fist again and knocked him the frick out. My knuckles ached. It was worth it. So that was r/D&D stories. Now, you don't gotta roll a natural 20 to wish little Izumi a happy birthday! Oh.